The morning sun barely cut through the smoke drifting over Luzon, casting long shadows across the ruined cane fields where American and Filipino forces had been retreating for days. It was January 1945, and the Imperial Japanese Army was pushing hard, with armor spearheading their advance through narrow valleys and battered villages. 12 Type 97 Chiha tanks formed the armored vanguard, grinding forward with absolute confidence. Behind one shattered barn, a small American sapper unit crouched low, waiting for orders they knew would never come. They were out of explosives, out of ammunition, out of time, and every road south had already been cut, except one. At the center of the group stood Sergeant Caleb Morris, 24 years old, uniform stained with soot and dust, goggles hanging around his neck. In his hands he held something that made the other soldiers stare in disbelief: a crate of dummy bombs, wooden practice shapes normally used for training, painted bright blue and filled with nothing but sand. "So you can't be serious," Private Lemos whispered. "Those things can't even scratch a tank." Morris didn't look up from the crude fuse he was attaching to the hollow casing. "They're not meant to scratch them," he said quietly. "They're meant to fool them." Corporal Herrera shook his head. "Fool tanks? With fake ordnance." Morris tightened the last bolt and finally met their eyes. "You disable a tank by killing its confidence, not its crew." In the distance, the rumble grew louder. 12 engines, steady and heavy, rolling through the dirt like metal thunder. Dust clouds rose behind the advancing Japanese armor as infantry followed in tight formation. Lemos swallowed hard. "Sir, we've got nothing left. No mines, no charges. How do we stop 12 tanks with fake bombs?" Morris hefted the dummy ordnance onto his shoulder. The blue paint chipped and faded. "We won't stop them with explosives." He pointed toward the narrow defile where the road pinched between two stone terraces. "We'll stop them with fear." The others exchanged nervous looks. Was he bluffing? Had he lost it? Was this desperation disguised as confidence? The tanks turned the corner, their silhouettes growing in the dusty light. The earth trembled under their treads. The sappers braced themselves. Morris stepped forward, calm, steady, and frighteningly sure of the impossible plan forming in his mind. "They'll never believe what's about to hit them," he murmured. And within the next 40 minutes, 12 Japanese tanks would be disabled, immobilized, abandoned, and rendered combat useless, without killing a single crewman. Stopped not by firepower, but by deception so bold it shouldn't have worked at all. The rumble of the Japanese tanks grew into a physical vibration beneath the dirt, rattling loose stones from the terraced walls. Dust drifted down from the cane stalks like ash. Morris crouched low beside the narrow defile, a natural bottleneck between two stone embankments, no wider than a single vehicle. Perfect. This choke point would force the Chiha tanks into a line nose to tail, with no room to maneuver. Herrera peered over the edge of the terrace, face pale. "Sir, that's a dozen tanks. We've got 8 men and a crate of fake bombs." "Not fake," Morris corrected, misleading. Lemos blinked. "Sir, they're painted blue. They're literally training dummies." Morris held one up. The sunlight glinted off the faded paint and the sand-filled casing. "Exactly. No one expects these to be used in combat. That's why they're going to work." He pointed toward the road. The first Chiha appeared, engine growling, commander scanning the terrain beneath his open hatch. Its turret rotated slightly, checking the fields for ambushes. Morris whispered, "They trust their armor. They trust the road. They trust what they see." He hefted the dummy bomb, thumb resting on the improvised fuse housing. "We're going to break all 3. The setup? The sappers moved quickly, placing the blue dummy bombs along the defile, some half-buried under dust, others lying conspicuously in the open. From a distance, their shapes mimicked aerial ordnance, slender, finned, distinctly American. Herrera shook his head as he placed the last one. "Sir, even if they look real from far away, they'll know the second they get close." Morris climbed onto the terrace above them, securing a rope tied to a weighted dummy shell positioned on a ledge. "That's the point," he said. "They need to get close." The others looked confused, but they trusted him enough not to argue. The first tank enters the kill zone. The lead Chiha clattered into the narrow defile, treads grinding on the packed dirt. The commander spotted the first blue bomb in the roadway. He froze. Morris watched through binoculars. Come on, believe in what you fear, not what you see. A shouted order rose from the tank's hull. The vehicle halted. A second tank pulled up behind it. Then a third. Engines idled loudly, exhaust tapering into the hot air. Herrera whispered. They stopped. Morris didn't blink. Of course they stopped. They think they've driven into a bombing run. The psychological strike begins. The lead tank's commander climbed from the hatch to inspect the object. He approached slowly, rifle raised, eyes wary. He kicked the bomb lightly. Sand moved inside with a soft shift. The commander stiffened. Sir, Lemos whispered, he knows. He knows it's fake. Morris shook his head slowly. He knows it's not exploding. That's different. The commander jumped back, expecting a delayed blast. Nothing. He shouted down into the tank. The crew panicked. They think it's a dud. Morris said, a misfired American airstrike. Lemos frowned. How does that help us? Morris nodded toward the rope behind him. Because duds mean more bombs nearby, ones they can't see. The trigger. The Japanese crews dismounted, sweeping the area for more ordnance. Rifles pointed outward. Tank platoon commanders barked orders, forming a perimeter. Morris crouched beside the rope. Ready to give them a warning shot, gentlemen? Herrera nodded nervously. Morris pulled. A weighted dummy bomb slid off the terrace, tumbling through dust and debris, crashing loudly right behind the second chief. Shouts erupted instantly. The crews bolted back toward their vehicles. One man tripped and scrambled behind a tread. Another dove headfirst into a hatch. But the fear didn't come from the bomb falling. It came from the imagined aircraft that must have dropped it. Morris whispered, they don't know we're here. They think they're under an American dive bomb attack. The tanks reversed in panic, the narrow road making it impossible to turn. In the confusion, their spacing collapsed. A muffled crunch echoed through the defile as the third tank backed into the fourth, wedging itself diagonally between the opposing walls. The entire column froze. Herrera's eyes widened. Sir, they're stuck. Morris nodded. Now, he said, we move. The real disabling begins. The men crawled down into the defile, staying low behind the stone walls as tank crews shouted orders in Japanese. Morris held up another dummy bomb. Remember what I told you? These aren't explosives. They're keys. Lemos whispered. Keys to what? Morris pointed to a Chiha's engine deck. Thin ventilation slats exposed under layers of dust and rust. To their fear, he wedged the dummy into the slats. Herrera stared. Sir, that won't damage the engine. No, Morris said. But when they see foreign ordnance jammed into their engine compartment, they'll think the opposite. One of the tank commanders looked back, spotted the blue shell lodged in his engine deck, and froze in horror. He jumped from the tank, shouting frantic orders. More fear, more confusion, more engines shut down. One tank after another. The column falls apart. Within minutes, the Japanese platoon commander issued a full withdrawal order. Crews abandoning their tanks and sprinting back toward the valley, convinced they had driven into an American bombing trap. Herrera whispered, Sir, that's 5 tanks disabled, without firing a single shot. Morris allowed himself a rare smile. 12 by the end, he said. Maybe 13, if they blocked themselves well enough. The defile trembled as another tank reversed too hard and clipped a stone terrace, collapsing under its own weight. Collins whispered, That's 6. Morris nodded, and it's only getting better. Because the greatest weapon in the valley wasn't the bombs at all. It was the belief that someone could have dropped them, and the Japanese armor had just lost a battle against a threat that didn't even exist. The Japanese tank crews retreated up the road in a stumbling rush, shouting warnings to one another, convinced American aircraft were circling somewhere above the smoke-filled valley. The sunny late morning sky, clear and empty, only made the fear worse. If there were planes, they were invisible. If there were bombs, they were falling silently. Morris motioned for his men to stay low, keep out of sight. The less they see of us, the more they imagine. Herrera crawled beside him, breath still shaking. Sir, isn't this risky? What if they realize the bombs are fake? Morris kept his eyes on the tanks. They won't check. Fear doesn't investigate, it reacts. A column in full panic. The three lead tanks remained trapped, wedged nose to tail in the defile. Their crews, panicked and believing themselves under an imminent airstrike, attempted to unjam the line by reversing wildly. A metallic shriek echoed down the canyon as one Chiha backed into a terrace wall. Loose stones cascaded down, burying part of its left track. Herrera flinched. 7, he muttered. Morris shook his head. No, they haven't fully abandoned that one yet. Behind them, two more tanks ground gears back and forth, trying to pivot in a space far too narrow. Dust clouds rose around them, choking the air. Lemos pointed. Sir, they're abandoning that one. A commander leapt from his hatch, sprinting down the road. His crew followed, waving their arms in warning to the tanks behind them. Now it's 7, Morris said quietly. The illusion tightens. One of the Japanese platoon officers pushed forward, shouting for calm. He climbed onto the hull of the 6th tank and scanned the sky. Morris smirked. He's trying to spot our non-existent fighters. The officer shouted orders to the 2 tanks that still had engines running. They began scanning their surroundings, turrets sweeping the ridge lines. Lemos tensed. Sir, if they spot us. They won't, Morris said. They're not looking for men. They're looking for wings. He grabbed another dummy bomb from the crate. This one had been modified more dramatically. Fuse capped with a salvage brass ring. Metal tail fins straightened with pliers. Herrera frowned. What's that one supposed to do? Look expensive, Morris said. He lobbed it underhand, letting it arc through the air and land squarely between 2 immobilized tanks. The metallic clunk echoed sharply in the stone corridor. Instantly, both crews bailed out, sprinting up the road as fast as their legs could carry them. Lemos burst into a grin. That makes 9. Morris corrected him. It makes fear consistent. That's what matters. The 10th tank falls to its own crew, farther uphill. A Chiha crew struggled to rotate their turret, looking for the attackers. In their panic, they misjudged the defile wall. The gun barrel clipped the stone, torquing the entire turret ring. A grinding, sickening squeal followed. The turret jammed permanently at a 30-degree angle. Herrera winced. Oof, that's 10. No, Morris said. That's them finishing our work for us. The tank commander yelled into the hull, kicked the turret base, then threw his hands up in despair. He ordered his crew out, believing the tank crippled beyond immediate use. They fled like the others, reinforcing the illusion. Morris took a knee, studying the remaining 2 tanks. These sat at the rear of the column and hadn't yet seen the dummy bombs up close. Their engines idled anxiously, commander heads popping in and out of hatches. They're confused, Morris said. Confusion is a doorway. We just need to shove them through it. He pointed to the men. Grab those 2 longboards. Paint the ends red. What for? Herrera asked. Strafing marks, Morris replied. We'll lay them in the dirt so they look like fresh aircraft passes. The human brain sees patterns it expects. The men moved quickly. Dust streaks, scratch grooves, red-tipped boards placed subtly on the ground. From the tank's perspective, it looked unmistakably like a strafing run had just ripped through the valley seconds earlier. Lemos stepped back in awe. Sir, it looks real. It doesn't have to be real, Morris said. It just has to be threatening. The last push. The 11th tank began backing up in fear, but the narrow road gave it no space. Its treads ground against a boulder embedded in the dirt. The grinding deepened, a metallic groan, and then, crack, the left track snapped. Herrera raised a finger. 11. The final tank, 12th in line. Now sat alone at the rear, crew visibly arguing. They pointed at the fallen dummy bombs, the strafing tracks, and the mobilized vehicles ahead. The commander made a decision. He threw his pistol belt over his shoulder, shouted to the others, and all 3 crewmen jumped out, running as fast as they could back toward the safety of their infantry formations. Morris watched them vanish behind a stand of palms. Now, he said softly, that's 12. The tanks are silent, but the battle isn't over. Lemos let out a ragged breath. So you just took out an entire armored platoon with wooden shapes and sand. Morris slung the empty crate onto his back. No, Private. We let fear take them out. Hermes looked back at the burned terraces, jammed vehicles, and abandoned tanks. So we won. Morris turned, scanning the valley floor. No, he said. We've only stopped the armor. Infantry is next, and they're not going to fall for the same trick. He looked at his men, exhausted, sweating, terrified, but alive. Get your gear. We move. The next phase is harder, because disabling tanks with dummy bombs was one miracle. Surviving the angry infantry following behind them would be another. The valley air had shifted. Moments ago, it was filled with the metallic roar of engines and the grind of armor. Now silence. Not peaceful silence. Predatory silence. Because while the tanks had fled or been abandoned, the Japanese infantry, nearly full company, were advancing cautiously through the smoke and dust, weapons raised, expecting an ambush. Morris checked his watch. We bought ourselves 10 minutes, he said. Maybe less. Herrera scanned the broken terraces, the disabled tanks. The choke point now littered with blue-painted dummy bombs. So what do we do now? We can't bluff infantry. Correct, Morris said. Infantry wants a fight. Armor wants predictability. He crouched and brushed dust from a tank tread. And right now they want to know who disabled 12 of their tanks without firing a shot, which means they're coming straight for us. Lemos swallowed hard. Sir, are we running? Morris shook his head. No, we're going to turn their curiosity into hesitation. The illusion evolves into a story. Infantry moved between the stalled tanks carefully, checking hatches, scanning the ridgelines. Their officers barked questions, confused, irritated, unable to understand why their armor hadn't returned fire. One soldier pointed at a dummy bomb wedged in an engine hatch and shouted something frantic. The officer stiffened. They think the airstrike came from above these terraces, Morris whispered. Herrera blinked. That buys us time? More than time, Morris said. It buys them a theory. And once a theory forms, soldiers look for evidence that fits it. He lifted another dummy bomb, the one with the bent fins and cracked paint, and handed it to Lemos. Place this one on the highest ridge. Make it look like it landed there and stuck. Lemos frowned. It's too light to be a real bomb. Exactly, Morris said. And they'll rationalize that as wind drift or fragmentation. Herrera shook his head in admiration. Sir, you're weaponizing their imagination. Morris didn't disagree. The infantry splits up, a critical mistake. From their vantage point, the sappers watched the Japanese infantry commander divide his men into three elements. Left team, moving along the terraces. Center team picking through the disabled tanks. Right team sweeping the brush above the defile. Herrera tensed. Sir, they're spreading out. They're covering angles. That's bad. No, Morris said. That's standard doctrine when you expect air threats. They're looking up, not down. He pointed at the center unit. And they still think those tanks died from above, not from us. Lemos whispered. So our threat is invisible. Exactly, Morris said. There's nothing more terrifying than a threat you can't locate. The critical moment, making them believe the threat still exists. The Japanese soldiers inspected the aftermath, forming their own conclusions. Some gestured at the scorch marks on the hulls. Others pointed at the fake strafing marks. One soldier knelt and studied a dummy bomb. Herrera's heart froze. He's checking it, sir. If he realizes it's sand. He won't, Morris said. Watch. The soldier lifted the bomb slightly, then quickly set it back down and shouted to the others. Lemos squinted. What did he say? Morris translated loosely. He thinks it's a delayed fuse aerial charge, meaning he won't touch it again. The infantry backed away from it, waving their comrades off. Just as planned, Morris creates one final illusion, the second wave. Morris motioned for the men to crawl back along the ridge, staying low. We need one more element, he whispered, to convince them the air threat is still overhead. Herrera whispered nervously, Sir, how do we fake aircraft without bombs? Morris pointed to two metal sheets half buried in rubble. Junk torn off, a wreck trailer years earlier. Grab those. Lemos frowned. What for? Morris positioned the sheets facing the valley and nodded. When I say go, slam them together. Hard. Herrera looked at him like he'd lost his mind. That'll sound like a tin roof collapsing on him. Just do it, Morris said. He waited, watched the infantry, saw the moment when all three squads were exposed in open positions. Then, go, clang, crong, wham. The metal crashed together, echoing across the valley like a distant dive bomber's stall warning. The sound bounced off the stone terraces, amplified into something uncanny and mechanical. The reaction was instant. Japanese soldiers flattened themselves against tank hulls. Others dove into ditches. Some ran for the trees, shouting warnings of a second airstrike. The commander grabbed binoculars, scanning the sky wildly, finding nothing, which only deepened the panic. Herrera stared. Sir, that actually worked. Morris dusted his hands. Good, because now they're thinking about survival, not pursuit. The turning point, fear replaces initiative. The Japanese commander ordered a full fallback to regroup. One squad pulled back immediately. Another sprinted up the road. The last retreated through the brush, abandoning the tanks entirely. Sir, they're leaving, Lemos whispered, stunned. No, Morris said. They're resetting. And when they reset, they'll return with certainty instead of fear. Herrera wiped sweat from his forehead. So what do we do? Morris looked toward the southern ridge, the only path left for their own troops. We move before they recover. We've bought time, not victory. He slung his pack on his shoulder. But time is enough. The men begin their withdrawal. Morris signaled the squad. We go. Quiet. No trails. We melt into the countryside, just like the ghosts they think attacked them. Herrera nodded. And the tanks? Morris glanced back at the valley full of immobilized Japanese armor. 12 disabled machines that no longer threatened anyone. They'll still be here tomorrow, he said. And so will the story of how they died. The men slipped into the brush, leaving behind a battlefield where the only casualties were machines. And the only weapon used was belief. Because Morris hadn't destroyed a single tank. He had destroyed their confidence. And that was enough. The sapper squad slipped deeper into the brush as the Japanese infantry regrouped around the mobilized tanks. The valley behind them was still thick with dust and the eerie silence that follows an impossible victory. But Morris wasn't relaxed, not even a little. He kept checking the ridgeline, the terraces, the narrow defile where 12 tanks had been neutralized without a single explosive charge. Sir, Herrera whispered as they moved through knee-high grasses. We really got away with it. Morris shook his head. No, we got ahead of them. There's a difference. They pushed onward, weaving through dry palms and bamboo thickets, boots crunching softly on old leaves. The heat grew heavier as they left the shade of the terraces, and the sounds of distant Japanese shouting faded behind them. But suddenly, Morris raised a closed fist. Freeze. The men stopped instantly. Lemos whispered, barely audible. Sir, what is it? Morris pointed to the dirt trail ahead. Fresh boot prints. Japanese, heading toward their path. A new problem. A patrol they didn't expect. Herrera's face tightened. Sir, a full patrol? No, Morris said, studying the prints. These are from search team. He traced a boot heel with his finger. Light gear. Nope, heavy packs. They're sweeping the route we're taking. Lemos swallowed. Sir, they're looking for the pilots they think dropped the bombs. Morris nodded grimly. That's right. And we're moving exactly where a downed pilot would run. Herrera let out a tight breath. So what do we do? Morris looked at the terrain. Dense undergrowth, a narrow trail, and a rocky incline to the right. We go up, he said, climbing to the overlook. The men scaled the rocky incline, gripping roots and stones as they climbed. Dust slid beneath their boots. The shimmering valley stretched below them. Halfway up, they heard voices. Japanese soldiers moving along the trail beneath them, searching the brush line. Lemos mouthed, "They're right under us." Morris pressed a finger to his lips. The patrol marched slowly, scanning the undergrowth for signs of an air crew or saboteurs. One soldier poked a clump of grass with his bayonet. Another examined a footprint left by Herrera minutes earlier. Then, the patrol leader froze. He knelt, brushing a palm over the print. Herrera's eyes widened. He found it. Morris reacted instantly. He grabbed a handful of dirt and rubbed it across the print, transforming the shape from a combat boot to something wider, flatter. "Bird," he whispered. Herrera blinked in shock. "You're kidding." Morris pointed down at the trail. Those big jungle birds leave prints that look exactly like a boot heel from a distance. Below them, the Japanese patrol leader hesitated. He looked around and nodded. They moved on. Lemos exhaled shakily. "Sir, I thought we were finished." Morris replied quietly, "We weren't finished. We were misinterpreted, and that's exactly what we need them to do." A dangerous shortcut. At the top of the ridge, Morris studied the map, creased, stained, and nearly falling apart. "We follow this spine south," he said, "but there's a gap we have to cross. Open terrain, maybe 200 meters. Herrera frowned. "Sir, if their infantry fans out." "They will," Morris said, "but they'll be looking behind them, not ahead." Lemos blinked. "Why behind?" Morris pointed to the valley. "Because 12 tanks don't die quietly. That commander will be terrified he missed something. He'll expect the next threat from the same direction." He looked ahead to the clearing they needed to cross, which gives us a window. Crossing the clearing under threat. The men crouched low in the brush at the clearing's edge. The sun baked the dry soil. Birds screeched overhead. Every sound felt too loud. "Two at a time," Morris whispered. "No running. Running draws eyes." Herrera and Lemos moved first. Slow, steady, deliberate. Their silhouettes barely rippled the grasses. Halfway across, Herrera stumbled, but recovered without breaking stride. Morris nodded. "Good. Keep it natural." Predators noticed panic. Once the first pair reached the far side, Morris signaled the next two. Then the final pair. Only Morris remained. He stepped out into the clearing and froze. A Japanese scout appeared on the hill above, binoculars raised, scanning. Morris dropped instantly to one knee, pretending to tie his boot. His stance was relaxed, too relaxed to be a soldier. The scout hesitated. Herrera's whisper carried from the far brush. "Sir, don't move." The scout scanned the field one more time, lowered his binoculars, and continued his sweep in the opposite direction. Morris crossed calmly into the shadows of the trees. Herrera grabbed his arm. "Sir, how did he not see you?" Morris answered, "Because I didn't look like something he should see." Reaching the abandoned farmstead, they followed the ridge south until they reached a half-ruined Filipino farmstead. Broken walls, collapsed roof, abandoned tools, half buried in dust. "This is our stop," Morris said. "Why here?" Lemos asked. "Because reinforcements pass this trail within the hour, and because from here," he pointed back toward the valley where 12 tanks sat motionless. "We can see everything that mattered today." Herrera leaned against a fallen beam. "So what exactly did we do today?" Morris set down the empty dummy bomb crate. "We taught a fully armed armored platoon that they were outmatched," he said softly, "without killing any of them." He looked each man in the eye. "And that matters. You win a battle without taking lives? That's worth remembering." The valley shimmered in the afternoon heat, silent but transformed, because the Japanese would return, but not with confidence, not with momentum, not with armor they trusted. They would return cautious, afraid, off balance, and in a campaign where every hour counted. Morris had just bought precious time without spilling blood. The farmstead creaked softly in the afternoon wind as Morris and his men settled into the shadows of a half-collapsed structure. They were exhausted, sunburnt, dehydrated, tense, but alive. Every man carried the strange knowledge that they had just crippled a tank platoon with nothing more than sand-filled shells and psychological leverage. But the day wasn't finished with them yet. Herrera wiped dust from his forehead. "Sir, think the Japs will figure it out?" Morris checked his watch again. "They will, eventually." Lemos frowned. "So they'll come back angry?" Morris shook his head. "No, they'll come back careful." He tore a strip of cloth from his sleeve and wrapped it around his palm where sharp rock had cut him during the climb. There's a difference. Anger is reckless. Caution slows armies. Signs of returning Japanese troops. A distant hum drifted from the valley. Shouting, boots hitting dirt, metallic clanking. The Japanese infantry had regrouped around the disabled tanks. Morris led the men to a gap in the farmstead's wall. Through it, they watched dust clouds rising again from the defile. Herrera whispered, "They're inspecting each tank." Morris nodded, trying to make sense of the impossible. The Japanese commander walked from vehicle to vehicle with a notebook, scribbling, pointing, gesturing. Soldiers pried open engine hatches, examined tracks, and took measurements. And even climbed a terrace and retrieved the dummy bomb Lemos had placed there. The man presented it to the commander. The commander stared at it with narrowed eyes. Morris watched his body language. "He's trying to rationalize it," he murmured. "He thinks he's missing something." Lemos bit his lip. "So what if he figures out the bombs are fake?" Morris shook his head. "He won't. Not today. He's not asking. What is this?" He's asking, "Why did this happen?" And that question, Morris continued, has too many dangerous answers. The Japanese commander makes a critical decision. From their vantage point, they watch the commander scratch a final note, then snap his notebook shut. He barked an order. Infantry squads rose to their feet. Engineers packed their tools. And the men began marching away from a valley, toward the north, along a secondary ridge route. Herrera blinked. "They're retreating?" "No," Morris said softly. "They're rerouting." He rose, dusting off his trousers. "That changes the entire map for the next 24 hours. They'll avoid this valley until they can explain it." The realization. The battle was changed without a shot fired. The men gathered around Morris as he drew a rough map in the dirt. Simple lines marking valleys, hills, and routes. "This was their primary armor route," he said, circling it. "And we just shut it down." Herrera stared. "For how long?" "Long enough," Morris said. "Long enough for reinforcements to reach the southern line. Long enough for the Filipinos regrouping inland. Long enough for artillery to reposition." Lemos shook his head in disbelief. "So all this with dummy bombs?" "No," Morris said. "All this with fear. Dummy bombs were just a paint on the mask." A messenger approaches. Soft footsteps crunched in the underbrush behind them. Weapons raised instantly. A lone Filipino guerrilla stepped into view, lean, dusty, rifle slung across his chest. He raised both hands. "Americans?" he asked quietly. Morris nodded. The guerrilla stepped forward, breathless. "I come from Lieutenant Ramos. We saw the tank stop. We saw them leave. What happened?" Morris exchanged a look with Herrera. "An illusion," Morris said, "and a bit of luck." The guerrilla shook his head in awe. "You saved the southern road," he said. "You saved hundreds." Morris replied, "We bought time. Use it well." The guerrilla nodded once and vanished back in the trees. The men finally rest, for now. Morris sat down in the shadow of the farmstead's wall, leaning back slowly. Herrera joined him. "So you ever think the army will actually believe what we did?" Morris chuckled. "No, they'll probably say the tank stalled, or the crews panicked, or the terrain was worse than expected." Lemos sighed. "That's not fair." Morris looked at him. "It's not about fair. It's about effective." He pointed toward the valley. "The tanks are silent. The road is safe. And nobody died today. That's more valuable than recognition." Herrera nodded thoughtfully. "What do we do now, sir?" Morris inhaled deeply, the dust turning to warmth in his lungs. "Now, we wait for friendly lines to catch up." He closed his eyes for a moment, and then we walk out of this valley like we were never here. A final glimpse of the valley. Before leaving the farmstead, Morris took one last look down at the defile. 12 tanks, silent, scattered like metal statues, abandoned in a perfect line, and not a single human casualty among them. He rested a hand on the rough wooden frame of the doorway. "This," he said softly, "is a kind of victory war doesn't tell stories about." Herrera frowned. "Why not?" Morris stepped away. "Because it proves something armies don't like admitting." "What's that?" "That sometimes the strongest weapon on the battlefield is imagination." When U.S. and Filipino forces finally advanced into the valley 2 days later, they expected to find wreckage from an intense firefight. Burned out tanks, blasted craters, and the bodies of men who had stood their ground. Instead, they found something that made seasoned officers stop in their tracks. 12 Japanese tanks, all intact, all abandoned, all arranged along a defile, like monuments to confusion. No shell impacts, no fragmentation patterns, no burnt armor, no signs of a firefight, just tanks. Silent, perfectly preserved, completely unusable. Lieutenant Ramos stepped carefully around a bright blue dummy bomb lodged in an engine grill. "What in God's name happened here?" he whispered. An American officer shook his head. "There's no battle damage. None. It's like the crews just left." Ramos traced the fake strafing marks in the dirt with the toe of his boot. Someone made them believe they were already defeated. When Morris and his men were finally located miles farther south, tired, dirty, sunburned, but unharmed, the truth shocked even the most imaginative commanders. "You disabled 12 tanks," the major said incredulously. "Without firing a single weapon?" Morris shrugged. "They disabled themselves, sir. We just suggested it." What the reports never captured. The official after-action account for the sector described the event blandly. Enemy armor abandoned due to suspected air threat. There was no mention of dummy bombs. No note about deception operations. No recognition of the 8 men who changed the timetable of an entire Japanese advance. But the infantry who marched past those silent tanks knew better. Filipino guerrillas told the story for years afterward, and Japanese survivors interviewed long after the war confessed that the tank crews had believed they were under a coordinated American air assault. Some swore they heard engines overhead. Some claimed they saw shadows of planes that never existed. Such is the power of fear. Morris's legacy. After the war, Sergeant Caleb Morris returned to Ohio, where he became a high school shop teacher. A quiet man with a knack for fixing anything and a reputation for never raising his voice. Students adored him without knowing why he carried himself with such calm. He never mentioned Luzon, never mentioned the tanks, never mentioned the day he won a battle without killing a single person. But once, when asked by a student why he enjoyed teaching more than anything else, he answered, "Because helping someone learn is better than helping someone die." That was as close as he ever came to describing the valley. The lesson history almost forgot. In the vast, violent tapestry of World War II, the story of 12 tanks disabled by deception barely registers. A footnote in an ocean of destruction. But in that single valley, on that single day, Morris and his squad proved something rare. That victory doesn't always require firepower. That courage doesn't always require violence. That saving lives, friend and foe alike, can be a battlefield achievement worth more than medals. And that sometimes the most effective weapon is the one an enemy believes exists. A myth, a fear, a phantom plane in a clear sky. A lesson as old as war itself. If this story moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button so more people can discover these forgotten moments of ingenuity and courage. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if anyone in your family served during the war. And make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next cinematic war story. ****.